Throughout the book, the text periodically asks, "Who is Robert?" By the end, there is a definite answer, even a second if you take the first draft ending into account, and those hold their own meanings. I want to propose a somewhat different question. What is Robert? What kind of man is he? What kind of morality does he hold? And where does the albatross and his adventure with the chair and secretary of the Weldon Institute figure into it? A whole chapter is dedicated to describing his physicality and assigning him his mental faculty. I simply added a severeness of character through my own voice acting. It's an artistic license, if you will. But what does he say and do? For most of the story, he says very little, and it's mostly centered around demonstrating his powers of flight to his guests. What he does for most of the story is direct and command and manage the albatross on its round-the-world journey. Apart from a great deal of sightseeing, there are some particular actions that can suggest an overall mission. In America, he kidnaps two boisterous, bull-headed skeptics and takes them against their will on his flying expedition. In the Pacific, he takes the albatross to hunt and kill a right whale. In Central Asia, over an inland sea, he takes the albatross fishing, and, in a fit of annoyance, lowers Fry Colin in a barrel in flight as corporal punishment. Later, in Paris, he lights up his albatross in the evening for strolling Parisians to see. In Africa, he takes albatross and crew to intervene in the bloody christening of a new king, sending the would-be executioners to flight and their erstwhile victims to freedom. South of Peru, he comes across the surviving crew of a shipwreck and tows them to safety of shore, with provisions to sustain them. And after surviving an Antarctic hurricane and setting down for repairs, when his guests escape, he sets about to capture them, until events turn and then he can't. Until the final act, these are the sum total of actions we see from Robert and his command of the Albatross and his crew. From the first our point of view characters, Uncle Prudent and Phil Evans, come to grips with Robert, the answer to the question of why they are taken against their will is simply because Robert can, so he did. This colors the rest of his actions for a time. Why hunt a whale when he had no intention to profit from it? Because he could. Why reveal himself and the albatross to various people around the world? Because he could. Why interfere in an African kingdom's christening of human sacrifice? Because he could. Why save a shipwrecked crew? Because he can. Why attempt to recapture an escaped Prudent, Evans, and Fry Colin when they escape? Because he can. At least until he can't. The only other through line of the journey is the subtly pervasive implication that Robert is looking for overt validation of his impressive accomplishments by his two most thick-headed skeptics, the fanatically and ideologically opposed Balloonians Uncle Prudent and Phil Evans. The two, of course, have no desire nor compunction to indulge Robert in bending the knee, so they admit nothing and deny Robert at least one conquest. As Robert continues on his voyage, his various actions could be taken as those of a man who's coming to grips with his new power. So he tries various courses and actions to see how far he can go and just what he can do. This extends to the albatross itself, which is described as a flying apparatus, but isn't actually outfitted specifically for any one task. It seems very much like what we would call a technology demonstrator, in the form of a flying yacht. Out of everything Robert does with Albatross, the one thing it truly excels at is flying for long distances and supremely long durations, and at hitherto unheard of speeds, as befits its name. The technology written is so undefined and fantastic that the characters probably never encounter its limits before story's end. There's more to discuss about the albatross later. Where Robur is concerned, he gets opportunities not just to impose himself on others and the world below, but also to act altruistically to a certain extent. Robur and Albatross conclude the story by the unambiguously heroic act of saving lives, even if it's the lives of the two men most opposed to his enterprise and very person. Before he leaves the story, and presumably that fiction world's history altogether, he promises that the secrets of near limitless flight will one day be known to the world. Ostensibly when the world, but most likely when Robur himself decides, is ready to use it and not to abuse it. Which is just as well in an age of empires. Jules Verne gives a definitive answer as to what Robur is, and an alternate one if you read the alternate ending to the story. I'd like to propose a different answer. Robur is, indeed, as the title says, a conqueror, but he's a different sort of conqueror. With his scientific and engineering brilliance most utilized in his albatross, he is indeed a conqueror of the sky. But he is more than that. I suppose his conquest is not just of open space, a future place that might be called a nation of Icaria, but of something more important. Robur, in his flying machine, and as demonstration in his flight around the world, has conquered the very notion of empire. At various points in the story, Robur's guests wonder at where Albatross must touch down, even after so long a flight. They presume that Robur must because even if Albatross can stay airborne effectively forever, the crew certainly can't, and even regularly replenished stores might dwindle to a point demanding a landing on safe ground, a home base. It's written that there is a home base, though the POV characters never lay eyes on it. Island X. It is presumed that Robur's resources with which to build and maintain Albatross, and the labor, people ideologically aligned with him, reside there. If this were a more cynical story, we could have seen Island X depicted as a slave state, with people of any sort bound to Robur's ambitions. Robur, a conqueror, in the same guise of every other empire of the period. Alas, this is not a truly cynical story, and we have no reason to believe that anyone who upholds Robur's vision, his conquest, doesn't do so of their own free will. For one thing, two people unwilling, those he kidnapped as guests, already cost him one albatross, and nearly cost him his crew and his life. So he has neither the ability nor the inclination to whip people to his will. Robur's conquest is far more important than that, I think. With an aircraft of effectively infinite range, Robur doesn't need any more land than the one lone island. Because they can access almost anywhere on the Earth for what Robur and crew need, they have no need to co-opt people to their service against their will. Because Albatross can fly, both high and fast as Robur wants, almost nothing and no one can catch them to mean them any harm, nor coerce them into any design they want no part of. Robur's conquest of the air is therefore not limited to the air. It's not that he's conquered the world, it's more accurate to say he's conquered the very need for empire. If ever there is an airborne Icarian nation, like Robur and his albatross, each crew and each flying apparatus would effectively be a sovereign state in and of themselves.